Andrea with the Bangs here. I'd say that Paul VanderKlay's YouTube channel is probably one of the most watched YouTube channels for me. I have a routine, you could say, of watching the videos that Paul puts up. And every once in a while he says something that sort of strikes a curious spark in my mind. And if his schedule allows it, he often allows me to then interview him about that thing that he said that made me curious. In this instance, what he said was something about how if people meet Christians and don't have much experience with church, they think Christians are nice. But if they have experience with church, they're like, ooh, no, Christian's not nice. I mean, to paraphrase, it was something like that. So I wanted to know more about this, and Paul was kind enough to give me the chance to explore this topic with him. I have to note, I did flip Paul in regards to the direction he's facing. So because of the way that we both looked like we were facing the wrong way. Anyways, technical stuff, not a big deal. I just wanted to be clear in case you're wondering and you're like, wait, is that, which way is Paul usually facing? That's the opposite of how he usually looks, whatever. That's what's happening there. And I thought I should mention it. If you are new, please do not forget to subscribe. Or if you've been watching for a while and haven't subscribed, please don't forget to. I think that's all I have for this intro. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So, okay, Paul, so I appreciate that you actually decided to have a chat, even though I did tell you what we were going to talk about, but apparently that was forgotten. Don't you roll your eyes at me, sir.
I believe you did tell me. I believe I did forget. I believe my life is a flur. I mean, my life is a flur.
It is. And you still said yes, though. The point is, you said yes, sight unseen for, I don't know what you want to talk about, but I'll give the girl a chance, the girl with the bangs.
Well, I just talked to you and your husband, and he's a student, and you're making your way, and you're trying to get your channel up there, so every little bit helps.
Yeah, every little bit of the pennies of the advertisement money I get from Google.
Oh, yeah.
I
get real rich doing AdSense on YouTube.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, so I think that I can work this in because you've been talking about, you haven't been talking directly. It's sort of been more of an indirect, meandering way of going through about it, which is fine. The situation of the church, and I don't know if it's necessarily gay marriage, but like homosexuality and being ordained and marrying the people who are potentially gay in the church, and this situation
marry
of
people
this.
who are potentially gay. There's lots of those.
Oh, yeah, I don't even know why I said potentially.
We're just not in this Christian Reformed church. We're just not allowed to officiate at same-sex weddings.
So it's. But I guess there's this thing called synod, and I only know about it because you talk about it, and so things are happening. Things are happening in the realm of some parts of Protestantism, and whether or not the gays will be accepted.
Well, the government's changed the definition of marriage.
Yes.
And churches, in many ways, sort of, if you were married by the government, churches just simply accepted that.
Yeah.
Then the government changed its definition of marriage, and churches now have to figure out what to do with that. But other Protestant denominations had dealt with it before the government changed the definition too, and recognized that. So this actually has been a conversation going on in Protestant churches easily since the 1970s.
Okay, so it's just ongoing. And I wasn't planning on speaking about this with you today, but I think that it can be brought in a way because I wanted to speak with you. You've mentioned in the past about how people have told you that people who are completely unchurched and have not set foot in a church and don't know anything about church often have positive things to say about individual Christians that they have met. And yeah, that's their exposure to Christianity, is the individual Christians. However, those who have been in church, involved in church, either were Christians and then deconverted, or just had a lot of experience around churches and people from church, the organization in general of churchness. So people who have been around in those spheres have very negative views of the church. And that's why I brought in the homosexual aspect, because that's part of the conglomerate of churches and their attitude there. So what I am wondering, I'm wondering, why do people who encounter individual Christians have such a positive view of Christianity? Again, I'm making a generalization, but yes, I am. And we're going to just leave it at that. And then people who have encountered the organization of church have negative views generally. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, generalizations are always difficult.
I know. That's why I'm tossing it over to you.
There certainly are people who have a particular Christian that stands as their poster person for why Christianity is bad. Mm-hmm. And then they've got a particular person who stands for their poster person for why Christianity might not be so bad. Mm-hmm. But the same-sex marriage thing has been a huge contributor to deconstruction. To me, there's no question about that, because people will say, well, the Bible is homophobic, and if the Bible got that wrong, why should it be trusted? Mm-hmm. And in that way, a lot of the arguments of the new atheists really hit home for a lot of people. So it's also helpful to remember that in most of these conversations, we're probably assuming sort of a white, middle class or upper class, fairly well-educated population. In my experience, a lot of these generalizations break down quickly when you deal with different ethnic groups and different social groups. So that's helpful. I mean, I might sound like some third wave anti-racist or postmodernist, but in my experience, that's been very true.
What are the differences that you see with these generalizations as you go into these different groups?
Well, I pulled up yesterday I caught Ryan Burge at Burge does he does polling on religious issues, and if you actually look at the general religious the big religious survey in the United States, people's attitudes with respect to many of these issues are deeply dependent on sort of where they sit in, I would say, the epistemological stream or the knowledge stream in the country. Who do you trust? Where do you get your information? Who is sort of forming your pre-conscious moral assumptions? And so that has a lot to do with people's attitudes towards church. One of the points that I've made often in my channel is that, and these are a lot of things I'm sort of working on in my videos right now. During the Cold War, let's say, church was considered to be sort of a higher speed morality than the general population. It was an intensification of morality, but the broader popular morality and church morality were very much aligned. And part of what happens at the end of the Cold War and in the 1960s and 70s is that alignment begins to shatter. And there are a number of elements that happened in there, including the civil rights movement. The 1980s were an important decade in that. And now it seems, after 2013 and the gay marriage thing, these are all sort of periods that have changed the alignment between church and society in Western culture. Now, the dynamics in, let's say, regions of the crown, because you have a queen, versus, let's say, the United States are a little different. But the United States has, for all of its existence as a European-type country in the Americas, has very much been a Protestant nation. And those things have changed. And so what you saw, for example, during the Cold War was Christians Christians might have been looked on as a little too uptight and moralistic than others, but that sort of expressed the alignment. What's happening today is there's just a total reconfiguration going on. And so people come with their moral attitudes, and then they meet Christians, and then they look at Christian institutions that have, policies and position statements and things like that. And people now have to sort of sort this out because it's all been disrupted. And what that means is, I was just reading, in fact, I've been reading a couple of books on the main line on progressive Christianity and what's been happening there. It's been far less studied than conservative Christianity in the Americas, or at least in North America. And one of the comments made by, it's actually Tripp's uncle who's writing this stuff in University of Washington. He noted that in mainline and progressive churches, the kind of the care for the poor and the down and out usually flows through organizations, but in evangelical churches, it's usually done individually. Mm-hmm. And what that means is, I know I'm making my way around to your question. What that means is often that people, for conservative Christians, they are going to express their Christianity not necessarily through social institutions, but individually. And what that means was that people will often meet a Christian and they'll see that this Christian is doing all kinds of things personally. Mm-hmm. And then they go to a conservative church, and then they look at the conservative church and they say, hey, wait a minute. That conservative church is mean to gays. That conservative church has ideas of hierarchy within marriage. That conservative church has all of these ideas that sort of in the broader social imaginary we're looking at as regressive, but this individual Christian is loving people one by one. And right there, you have the dynamic that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Because they look at the Christian and say, this person is really good at loving people one by one. I just saw another survey that was done, which demonstrated that Republicans in North America have greater sociological diversity in their friendship networks than Democrats. What does that mean? That means that Democrats are sort of cocooning. They can't tolerate Republicans. In fact, since Trump, they find it so difficult to tolerate Republicans, they're cutting off social ties to them. Mm. Conservatives are less choosy. They'll tolerate their Biden-loving, AOC-loving, Democratic friend and neighbor and spouse, and they'll still go to a conservative church. In other words, what's happening is that the left is getting, and this is what we've seen in broader terms, the left is getting increasingly intolerant, and the right continues to sort of have a personalism that even people from the left now and then find to be attractive and even compelling, but they don't like the structures that have formal policies that sound to them like what they've been trained to recognize as hate.
Okay. Well, that did answer my question, but I'm still, well, how do we work it out?
Well, what do we want to do? Here's the question. The question is, what do we want? Do we want everybody to get together? So I just read a tweet by a friend of mine who she's on my CRC Voices group, and she's actually one of the founders of the group. She was a professor of computer science at Calvin when I was a student. So she's a generation older than I am, not a lot older than I am. She was a very young professor then. I better be careful what I say. I don't know if she'll see this, but Kath, I always call her KKDM. Kristen Dumais, who wrote Jesus and John Wayne, tweeted about a group of Midwest pastors that were having a Bible study about her book, Jesus and John Wayne, and people were very excited about it. And my friend on Twitter basically says, this is the kind of thing I want to hear from Paul VanderKlay. In other words, she wants Paul VanderKlay to get in line with, having this particular perspective. And now in the Christian Reformed Church, again, I'm on the left in the Christian Reformed Church. That's what people have a difficult time understanding. But why won't I get along with I think what they fail to see is people look at religious conservatives and how they try to apply their moral framework in institutions. They look at that and they say, that's totalitarian. But then when they watch, let's say, religious progressives applying what has become sort of the standard moral settings in the culture, they say, well, this is just the movement of history. And it's like, everybody wants the world to mirror back to them what they think is right. That's normal human hubris. And to me, theologically, that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, because Adam and Eve look at God and are like, we kind of like to rule this place. God's kind of like, really? All right, out you go. Let's see how you do. And
word for word, verbatim, the fall from Genesis 3.
The Paul VanderKlay Living Bible Translation.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's I think what's going on. And well, here's the question. Well, and I think Peugeot says it quite well when he talks about love. What is love? Love is sacrificing for the other. Who is the other? The other is different. And so when Jesus says, love your enemies, that's really sort of an archetypal ideal. You know, who do you hate more than an enemy by definition? And so that's another way that Jesus sort of changes things. Well, how should we love our enemies? That's a very difficult thing. But
well, because we have some, like the United Church or like the Unitarian Church, United. So there are
the United Church of Canada. The Unitarians are quite different.
Okay, so so one of these groups is fine to even say ordain LGBTQ people.
Oh yeah, there's lots of groups like that.
Yeah,
lots of Christian groups like that.
Yes, so
they're just not in the news much.
Right, because they're just going with culture. So and it's been framed, at least to me, by my conservative Southern Baptist mother, and my conservative old like Brethren church that I grew up in, that it's being conformed to the patterns of this world if you allow such things, but like you've been going through in your sermons, sorry, those who are like not in the Christian sphere, this is going to be going deep in. So you just were framing about, usury laws and with regards to money lending, and then circumcision around the time of Paul, and etc. And so there are many things that have been culturally integrated that we're not concerned about as sin.
Yes.
And so, but I've been taught, no, this is different, and we don't want to be just conforming to the patterns of this world. But then you could have said that for, I'm going to charge you interest, and like, oh, evil sin for the medieval church. So but I also am like, oh, love one another. And like, I'm so, because you did a series on marriage, a very long series, where it was only a few episodes, but it was, you went back to Abraham, I think. And we're looking at marriage through there. And like how important, like we can't even talk about gay marriage before we talk about marriage and why it's important in the first place. And so I went through a time where I was really like thinking about it and reckoning with it. And I've just come to a space where I want to love my brothers and sisters, the way that we are called. And I feel conflicted about the patterns of this world, though. I don't even know what would be sin. I don't even know what would be missing the mark, because I know that Christendom has integrated much of culture into itself, and we're still here. Christendom has not gone away in its different iterations, but it's, so I'm feeling very confused about it.
Oh, you're not alone.
Okay.
Think about this. So you just quoted that citation of the Apostle Paul from Romans 12. Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world. You also listened to Jonathan Peugeot. What does Jonathan Peugeot major in?
Pattern making.
Patterns. The patterns of this world.
Pattern.
Now, pattern. Now, here's the question. What does world mean? Because if you read the New Testament, that word world is a very tricky word. Now, we don't think about it. And so when you were raised in a particular segment of Christianity, and they read the Apostle Paul and said, do not conform to the patterns of this world. You had, and that particular tradition highlighted for you a number of patterns that the tradition said, these are not the patterns of this world. This is not the way life is supposed to be. These patterns are the way the life is supposed to be. So what it actually is a conflict between patterns. And you're asking the question, how do we know which patterns are, well, now even we want to know, what word are we going to use? Which patterns are good? Which patterns are of God? Which patterns are of the creation? I mean, actually within the theological language and the theological fights that these groups, the particular group that you were raised in, let's say, there's so much has been going on over the years of trying to figure out, okay, well, what does God want? And we can even pause there and say, well, what do you mean by that question? Well, God wants good. Well, okay, that's all sort of by definition. How can we know what God wants? Well, read it in the Bible. Okay, well, how do we read the Bible when, love and sex among the patriarchs looks radically different than, let's say, we just chatted with your husband. Let's say he says, Andrea, sure is a lot of stuff to do around the house here, and we got these busy kids. I kind of like to bring in a concubine. And
oh, gosh.
And you'd say, over my dead body.
Well,
probably over yours.
To put it lightly, yeah.
That's what my wife would say. Yeah. Say, bring in a concubine over your dead body.
Yeah.
So, yes, patterns have changed. And this is the challenge because, well, which patterns, if we are going to be faithful to, and there's lots of ways we can frame this, to the heart of God, which patterns must we live out? Well, how do we know? Well, Jesus says, love your enemies. Okay. What does that mean? What does love mean when it comes to my enemies? Does it mean always saying yes to them? I doubt it. You love your children and you say no to your children plenty. Mm-hmm. There's three, of all of the children in the world, my guess is you love these three children more than anyone else, and they are loved by you better, by you and your husband than by anyone else. Yet there's tons of no in that.
Yes.
And all of that, yes and no, there are some things that you are just darn sure of, but there are other things that it's like, and so you work that out. And it's no different in larger structures and organizations that are trying to deal with these things. And so right now we're in a time and place when something like the question of homosexual behavior and same-sex marriage, but those are only two of lots and lots of topics that are deeply conflicted, and we're trying to work them out. Well, what are some different ways that people work things out? Well, we can kill everyone who disagrees with us. That's not a good plan. And so fortunately, we're not doing that. And part of my sermon Sunday was, I had read the book of Acts numerous times. And usually the parts of the book of Acts we really like are the early sections when there's miracles and Paul's missionary journey. And actually, the climax of the book is when Paul is assaulted by a mob that has been instigated by Jerusalem Christians who really don't like what's going on with the Gentiles. That's what happens in Acts 21. And the rest of the story, Paul is basically imprisoned for the rest of his life until he, probably for the rest of his life, there's debates as to whether or not he ever went to Spain, but until he is executed by Nero. So if the story of the Gospels is that Jesus is killed by those who wanted to shut him up, well, eventually, to a certain degree, Paul gets killed by fellow Christians who disagree with him with respect to circumcision. That's a big fight. Now, fortunately, I would say, we're having disagreements and we're trying to work through questions. And me being sort of on the CRC left, I am more open to this question about same-sex marriage than a lot of people further to my right, but I am not just going along with the parade like people further to my left. And so the people to my left are really annoyed with me. And they're really annoyed with me because I'm really thinking hard about this and I'm raising objections, and hopefully some of the objections I raised spur new thought and new conversation rather than the way that the debate has been framed. And now the people on the left are really annoyed at me because why won't Paul just get to, Paul has a big YouTube channel. Paul could really help us do this. The people on the right are sort of cheering me because it's like, to have Paul on our side is kind of a big win.
Oh,
so,
look at you. You're the prettiest girl at the ball.
I had status before my YouTube channel. So, but this is, but we don't just do this with someone who has a YouTube channel. We do this with every single individual, which is why this friend of mine tweets on why, I would love it if Paul would run a growing Bible study or a growing book group where everyone would read Jesus and John Wayne and just fall over themselves and say, yeah, we hate those Christian nationalists. I don't think it's that simple. And I'm going to say it. And that ticks people off and causes other people to cheer. But I think this is the process the church must do in order for the continual purification of the church. And I think that begins right from the stories of Jesus, right from the stories of circumcision, and goes till now. In other words, expect conflict. Let's just do it productively.
What does productive conflict look like, Paul?
Well, we're not killing each other. That's good.
Okay, that's enough. We don't have to keep talking. No, not killing each other, folks.
That's not a small thing.
Okay, yes, okay.
We take it for granted here.
Yeah, it's true.
Praise God, but it's not a small thing, okay? So what else is productive? Probably seeing people change their minds. Think about, you had Ryan Bennett on your channel. One of the things he was very excited about was this IDW protocol. You've had David Fuller on your channel. He was very excited about Jordan Peterson. And part of his, so here's a guy who, it wasn't about church, although that's kind of how he feels about church perhaps, but he looked at the IDW and thought, maybe now we're finally going to have more productive conversations. And he was disillusioned because he began to say, well, these, Peterson and Weinstein and all of these guys, they just seem to be sort of burrowing down on the right now. And they're sort of a weird area of the right because they really shouldn't be part of the right, but because of the social dynamics they're seen from the left. So my continual desire is to have more and more productive conversations. So this afternoon, I'm having a conversation with a guy who pestered me and basically said the Human Sexuality Report in the Christian Reformed Church had no examples of people in a committed same-sex relationship. So why don't you have me on your channel? All right, let's go. Now, how will that conversation go? I have no idea. Will he be happy with it at the end of it? I have no idea. But I'm not his enemy. And I'm actually sort of a progressive in that, I'm not looking to have the police kick down his door and jail him for sodomy. I'm not okay with that. So things have moved. But part of the function of the church, I was just listening. I was just started reading Brett Weinstein's new book. And on his conversation, one of the interviews that he did, the one with Michaela Peterson, he talks about the speed of change. Here's the church, I think, has always been sort of a speed regulator in society. And it does that through having conservative people, having progressive people, and facilitating and hosting a conversation in which hopefully we learn something of the truth at many levels of discernment. So for me, that's what a productive conversation looks like. I think, let's take the usury example. I can very much understand the move that, well, it's okay for Christians to lend money to other Christians at interest if the loan is for commercial enterprise. So the lender should partake in the fruitfulness of the commercial enterprise. But then the distinction, you shouldn't charge interest when loans are for necessities. Does that mean credit cards should be zero interest? That would be nice. Because a lot of people use their credit cards for necessities. But then again, now in our consumerist society, what is a necessity? So, we kind of have this instantiated in law in some place here in the United States where you have sales tax. So California is the highest sales tax in the country. And our sales tax doesn't apply to food items, grocery items. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of an instantiation of Calvin's idea. And in New Jersey, you didn't have sales tax on clothing because clothing was also a necessity. So see, these ideas just sort of trickle down to us. But really, as society gets more and more complex, we have to keep working through these things. Well, how are we going to know? Well, we know this by basically having conflict.
I don't like conflict.
Yeah, this is a really important thing in human beings. We need it, but we don't like it. You know what other things I don't like? I don't know. Just about everything that involves effort that keeps me from doing what I want to do. But I need those things to live. Like exercise, diet, all these things. I don't like any of them. Conflict's just one of those things. But we want conflict to be productive. And what I mean by productive, we want it to yield some of the things we desire, like truth. How else are we going to get there? We're self-conflicted often in our heads, but that's one thing. And so, part of my videos are, I'm just talking my self-conflicts. Oh, there's this, and then there's this. And then I share it with you all, and you all ping in. But the truth is, I learn from you guys.
Well, so for me, the conflict, even though, my conflict is conflicted because I am, here's what's going through my head right now. So I am like concerned about Christians not being like, there's a fire in Rome and it was the Christians who helped deal with the fallout of all of that, even though they were the ones blamed for it. And there's reports where it's like, oh, these Christians, I want to persecute them, but they're also helping where the government services aren't helping. So that's, I guess you can idealize early Christian, before it was Christendom, the early church. So I don't want to do that, but that's the idea. That's an example of what I want, Paul. No, it's not what I want, but to me, it seems right.
Yes, it is what you want.
Okay, it is.
You want good things.
I'm just going to frame it better. Okay, I would like Christians, from how it seems, what is the right way to be, following the footsteps of Christ, of Jesus, to be different because they are putting others first. They're walking the extra mile. They're giving their, their cloak and their shirt to the needy. Like, they're sort of what you were describing, the individual Christian doing individual helps to people on a personal level. And I might be wrong in this, but I also want the church to do that as well. I want the church to look like the beacon of hope in society. And it isn't. But then we're also told they will hate you as they hated me. So that's my conflict in the conflict. Because I'm like, oh, the church should be the one who is like, we want to find faults, but we can't because they love so much. But then I'm like, oh, wait, they're going to be hated. We're said we're to be hated. So I am like, so I'm saying like too much because that's my brain. Like, I default to my valley girl. I'm like, not sure what to think. And I feel the things are happening that we're told that will happen. Oh, there is individuals who are loving people. Oh, also you're going to be hated. So those are both happening. But it seems to me, I can't help, but especially because I know her church history. I have a degree in it, undergrad, mind you, and it was a long time ago. But I'm also reading the Dominion, so I'm getting a refresher of church history. And I mean, there was 3 popes at one time. So then that was before the church split. Well, that was post the East and West split, but that was before the Protestant split. So it's part of probably why they weren't taking it seriously, because, like, come on. You had 3 popes. Look at the Babylonian captivity of the church. Look it up. Anyway, so it's when the church becomes institutionalized and has church lawyers and becomes more Aristotelian. Thanks, Aquinas. Anyway.
Oh boy, are you getting in trouble?
I know, but there's
so it's after you on the Discord.
Okay, but I'm not against. I think that
Aquinas.
Okay, the thing is, I don't think it's bad necessarily. I do think that he did a lot of the heavy lifting of us being able to square that circle of certain things within Christendom. I do think that he maybe theologically, philosophically, but it also really, really like categorized everything. What the Pharisees did, like, well, let's get some rules so that we know what work means. You know, that's what the lawyering up did of the church society. And, you know, that looking back to C.S. Lewis's the discarded image, the medieval model, not to go against it. I actually do think that the medieval model is really a fantastic thing that I've learned about from that book. An interesting way to look at the world. However, every aspect of society has its place. Like a little Rolodex of like, oh, like Wikipedia, you can say, encyclopedias, you know, like looking up things. Well, we've got everything in its place, you know, and you were saying human beings don't work like that. Things get more messy than order allows. And so I don't even know where I'm going with this, but I just feel conflicted about all of this. And it feels like the institutionalization, the radical institutionalization of the church. And then Protestantism following with like, oh, we disagree and we're going to go here. And we disagree and we're going to split over here. The fracturing, the institutionalization and the fracturing of the church. It makes me feel like, oh, no wonder the world doesn't trust us.
We don't like institutionalization until we need it. For example, do you like standardization? Well, I don't know if I want to get into the vaccine thing. Let's use a measles vaccine, okay? So we can sidestep the whole thing. How do you feel about standardization of measles vaccines? I mean, when the doctor comes to your child that you love with a syringe and a little vial and says, I'm going to inject this substance into your child, you will say, well, what's in that bottle? Anti-measles stuff. Well, where does it come from? And then what you want is, this is approved by the Canadian government and this blue seal team of doctors and pediatricians and scientists that will say it will not harm your child and it will be efficacious in preventing measles. All of that is institutionalization. So we want institutionalization in medicine, and we don't want it in church. You go to church one day and they say, we're throwing sawdust on the floor and we're going to have a Jesus hootenanny. Let's all get going. Now you might say, well, that's kind of fun. And then someone comes in and, I don't know, starts jigging on the floor. And everyone says, oh, let's all jig on the floor. And then you find out that at the end of the service, he was actually having an epileptic seizure and nobody helped him. Everybody thought, I thought it was the Holy Spirit. So, institutionalization is like anything else, something that can be helpful and something that maybe isn't terribly helpful. So, we can sort of channel Rousseau and say, evil institutionalization. And I hear that on, sometimes people will, I won't name names, sometimes people will say, oh, pure religion is the authentic, non-institutional expression of whatever's happening in me now. Okay, well, like once a day I feel a movement coming on and a real strong urge to get it done. Is that religion? It's at some point, because when they think in these terms, they've got ideas about what this feels like, what this looks like. And those aren't bad ideas, but over time, and if you want an example of this, just go on the internet and find, I don't know if they still have them. I'm sure they still do. I don't know if they're being Reddit or where they'd be, but there used to be these, internet bulletin boards, which were about prophecy. And so you'd have Christians and they were prophesying all kinds of things. And people just read those bulletin boards and say, oh, wow, this means that, we'll go back to 1980s. This means that the Russian bear is the USSR is going to come down and attack the state of Israel, and America is going to stand firm on the plains of Megiddo, and it's like, that didn't happen, did it? So what of your prophecy? Well, we need groups of people who will look at this stuff and vet it. Well, now you got an institution. So it's when I listen to you conflicted, it's Christianity is working in you. That's part of Christianity, because just as you said, there are all these these things that are contradictory that you can't quite put together. And you see them in the early church. On one hand, people in the Roman Empire sometimes people looked at Christians and said, you know what? They're cannibals, and they're atheist cannibals. That's what a Christian is. They're atheist cannibals. On the other hand, they don't just care for their own widows. They care for the widows of their enemies. And they do so at the threat, if not the cost of their life. And, Rodney Stark did all of this, wrote all of these books that basically said, well, if a plague went through a town, and all of the priests of the pagan temples ran out like rational people would, I don't want to be around the plague, I'm going to get out of town. And Christians, those irrationalists, because they believed that actually Jesus was going to raise them from the dead, they stayed in town and cared for the victims of the plague at the risk, even the cost of their lives. Those victims of the plague recovered and said to the priest, y'all ran out when I was on this bed my last dying day, and that person you call an atheist cannibal came and cared for me. Guess what? Count me cannibal. I'll be one of them. And so, but that's Christianity working. And, so on one hand, Christians were, helping. Some Christians were, I'm sure not all, Christians were helping they were loving their enemies and loving their neighbors. On the other hand, Christians were saying, we're not going to go to the shrine of Augustus or the temple of your Greek god. We're not going to participate in that. And people are like, well, how can you be a good citizen and not participate in the civic, for us would be political, in this civic religion. So, I mean, and this is actually what's going on today, because America does have civil religion and Canada has civil religion, and Christians are sometimes sort of standing outside of it. And I mean, but we've had 2,000 years of it. And so it's all incredibly nuanced. And there's, just like in Acts 21, there's Christians on both sides yelling for the extermination of other Christians. At least the thought extermination, thankfully.
Right. Well, and that's the biggest problem to me of all, is that, back, looking at history, it was Christians killing Christians. The Protestant Catholic wars.
Yeah.
And then the Anabaptist Protestant wars, the religion wars. And I believe that you read that book, Reformations, and went through all of that. And to me, that seems like the biggest hypocrisy of all. Love your enemies. Well, if your enemies happens to be what you consider to be an apostate, what happens there? Ugh.
Could there be any greater enemy than a traitor? Traitors are, by definition, the greatest enemies, because other enemies who don't know you, they just hate you because of some flag. The traitor is up close, and they use their inside position as a brother, sister, friend, bosom buddy to stick the knife in. The traitor is the archetypal enemy.
I know, but it's not gone well within Christendom. Showing love to the traitors.
People are bad at Christianity. Christians are the ones who try, and they're still bad at it. And we even have a hard time conceptualizing it. That's why it's an ideal.
Be perfect as I am perfect. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect.
That's right. And the context of that is God brings the rain and the sun, the rain to fall on the fields of the just and the unjust. God brings the sun to shine on the fields of the just and the unjust. Be ye perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. He's generous towards his enemies. It's like, how can I be generous towards my enemies? I mean, Christianity puts you right there in the middle of this conundrum that can't really be solved. But what it forces you to do is to wrestle your whole life long with all of these issues. I wanted to be a Christian so all my ideas would be validated and I could just relax. Well, Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble. They will hate you like they hated me. Well, who's going to hate you? Well, who hated Jesus? At one point in the Gospel of Mark, it says his mother and his siblings wanted to have him committed because of all the crazy talk. Yep, that's Jesus' mother. Mary wanted to have Jesus. It's in the Gospel of Mark. And I mean, this stuff is right in the Bible, and it wasn't smoothed out, which is an amazing thing. And so we shouldn't be surprised that there's conflict. And it's absolutely legitimate to be frustrated that we can't resolve it. But it shouldn't be surprising because that's all we've seen.
Okay. Well, I'm.
Did I just kill your interview? I'm sorry.
No. I'm doing introspection. I'm thinking as you're explaining these things to me. Why was that a topic that I picked out of all the things you've discussed in the hours that you've put on YouTube? Why did that stick with me? I think I want to talk about this with Paul next. Why, individual Christians attract people, but then the whole institution of the church can repel, like, and I think it's because to me that seemed, oh well, we just have to get ourselves sorted in the church, the institution itself, along with the parishioners, like everybody. If that gets sorted, then they'll all come. And so I don't know why I thought that. To me, it seemed like, oh, okay, so if individual Christians give show Christ to people, and we want the church to be the body that attracts people, then we need to bring healing to the institution of the body as well. Like the individuals are doing this, which is great, and then I am discounting all the individual Christians who give a bad name to Christianity, but I'm just thinking of whatever. So that shows my fault as well. But I guess I just was like, if we can figure out the church situation, then the problems are solved. I think I just want problems to be solved so that we can bring the kingdom of heaven to earth.
Yeah, it's always a gift. We don't bring it. It's given to us. And so, and it's your desires are absolutely correct. We long for this. And this itself, though, is also built into the faith. We long, and read it in the book of Revelation. You have the martyrs who have been killed in the, and they cry out, "How long, O Lord?" And the vision in the book of Revelation at the end of the story is, it's a sea of crystal, and there's no longer any sea, and it's nations and peoples, and it's the sum of our desires. And we're promised this, which is wonderful, because if the word was, well, I'll tell you, Andrea, you're going to want this and you're never going to get it, that's kind of like, screw this. I'm just going to kill my neighbor. Yeah, I'm sick of their stinking thinking and whatever they're doing that annoys me. But no, you don't want to do that. And, and this thing scales, it's in every marriage, it's in every household, it's in every church, it's in every business. And what's interesting, this is something I've been thinking about lately, but I haven't talked a lot about it. When you think about things that take over, now think about cancer. Cancer is our cells that are just multiplying. But they're parasitic, they kill its host. And when you think about things that are stable, well, then there's, and I think this is some of my appreciation for Jonathan Peugeot's work. He's got a vision for that. Now there's obviously things to push back on Peugeot for too, because I just got a message from someone who's involved in all of this, and one of the things that I see developing is more and more pushback on, let's say, Peugeot was sort of the hotness to the party, but then certain other segments who, by very structural ways, are looking at Peugeot and say, hey, wait a minute, Peugeot's all about Caesar. And we've seen Caesars before. That didn't go so well. So, and again, all of this stuff just scales up and it scales down. And we'd like to say, screw it, I don't care about this stuff anymore. But it'll always find you. It'll always be there.
How do we discern the correct pattern to follow? Yeah, that's what you mentioned, that like these conflicting patterns. How do we discern which is the pattern that is the one that we should follow?
Well, and then, right away you introduce the word should, and, should for what? And again, that scales up too. The glory of God, to do what's right, the truth, what's beautiful. So in one of my sermons a couple weeks ago, I talked about multi-factor spiritual authentication, and I used Acts 15, which I think stands at the center of the book of Acts. And I think it's, part of what Well, we seek the will of God. That's one way to say it. Well, how do we seek the will of God? Well, if I were to ask you that question, you would probably give me an answer, which is pretty much the same answer I'm going to give you. Well, let's see, we'll pray about it. Okay. We'll read this because you're a Christian. We'll read the scriptures. Okay. And we'll try to discern those. Okay. Well, we'll talk to authorities around us, and they might be authorities in various aspects, and we'll have our own personal experience. It seems to me that that's how everyone discerns truth. Now, a lot of the differences lie on how much do we weigh certain things. Part of the surprise of Jordan Peterson was that he suddenly bursts on the stage with a rather cogent evolutionary argument for the authority of the Bible, which was like, didn't expect that. and he was able to communicate it in a way that grabbed large numbers of people. And so suddenly, lots of things, and along with the Bible came tradition and authority and a whole bunch of those things. They came back on the menu, but those things are always on the menu in one form or another.
Okay, maybe that's where I'm coming from, because I see that it's possible to grab the people who like are not typically drawn to that, and then they are, they're influenced by Peterson's teachings on the the psychological reading of the Bible, which is like psychological. Then it brings them to that side of the symbolism, and then that brings them many people over to Pajot, who goes it even further. And so I suppose I'm sort of, oh, look, a revival. How do we get it to stick? How does the church do this? Because you said this. So how many pastors were like, how do I do that? Fill up a stadium.
Well, Billy Graham did it. Jordan Peterson hasn't done it. He's done some impressive things, but he's not come close to Billy Graham. And there's a lot to that. Billy Graham worked in conjunction with institutions. Billy Graham leveraged institutions. Jordan Peterson is kind of out there on his own. It was a pretty impressive thing, but he was just sort of a loner out there. And generally speaking, loners do less than people who work with institutions, because institutions have all of this framework. So, but no, I did want to learn from Jordan Peterson. And I looked at what he was doing. I said, I should figure out what's going on there. And that's been very productive. It hasn't made me Jordan Peterson. I don't want to be Jordan Peterson.
Right.
I want to be me. But I wanted to learn from him. I wanted to learn from N.T. Wright. I wanted to learn from Tim Keller. Once we see someone who is doing, I want to learn from Jonathan Pajot. I want to learn from John Vervaeke. I'm learning from all sorts of people, and that's kind of what human beings do. And I want to do that because, well, like you, I want the same things you want, and I feel the same frustration you feel. I just want to, so tonight we're having our first in-person meetup that we've had for a while. And, there's all kinds of things I want, but how much do I want them? And do I want good things? And I want other things that are in conflict. But yeah, I want us all to get together. I want the eschaton to come. I want peace and love and joy and goodness and beauty maximized eternally for everyone. I mean, that's the definition of what we want. We want everything.
Okay, so let's bring it back to what I was talking about at the very beginning. The issue at hand that you've been discussing about the LGBTQ community, or
Yep.
as I traditionally have heard from the more conservative side of my background, the gays.
Conservatives had a lot worse words, but we'll keep
well,
going.
that's how growing up. That's the gays. So, what Why have you been going into this as much right now? It's you said it's been since the 70s. It's been on your radar more. Is it because of Synod coming up?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because things are reaching a breaking point in my denomination. And most pastors, no, that's not true. So you've got pastors on the extremes who are making a lot of noise, and you got pastors in the middle for whom talking about this does you very little good. Because if you talk about it, you're probably going to alienate someone on either side, and maybe they'll leave your church. Maybe you can't afford to have people leave your church because it's a really small church. Maybe they'll start talking bad about you and they'll hurt your reputation. Maybe you get labeled at someone. So while you've got people on the extremes, you've got lots of people in the middle that keep their mouths shut and their heads down because they're just trying to get through life. And you got a lot of pastors doing that. They're just trying to hold their church together. They're just trying to love people. They're just trying to teach the Bible. They're just trying to get through. And this issue is likely going to and it already is fracturing. It's probably just going to fracture my denomination. Mm-hmm. And that is going to mean a lot of not good things for a lot of people. And we don't want that to happen, but we don't seem to be able to avoid it happening because the people over on one side really want to make progress in acceptance and affirming same-sex relationships. People on the left side very much want to stop this far broader movement going on in the culture, and they want their church to be sort of a little island, which is different from the rest of the culture. And we've got
Wait, on the right side or the left side?
On the right.
Oh, okay.
They don't want, we fought this fight for years over women in church leadership in the Christian Reformed Church. And we stopped talking about it at Synod in the end of the 20th century with a political compromise that said, we're going to let local churches decide, and then things can kind of scale up from there. And so that got it off the Synod conversation rolls, but in many ways it made neither side happy. Mm-hmm. Because women feel like second-class citizens when there are churches and groups in the denomination that don't think they should be ministers, elders, and deacons. And these groups feel like second-class citizens when all kinds of other people in the denomination look at them and say, why don't you get with the program and stop complaining about women and start including them? So we've had that tension now for a very long time in the denomination. And then this issue comes up, and it's like, and so then the progressives say, we want a local option. And everyone says, it's just the nose in the door. And because then suddenly we're going to need new liturgies about man, woman, woman marriages. And then you're going to be yelling at all the people who don't do those marriages. And, the whole dynamics are going to start all over again. We don't want to go down that road. And so we have a sister denomination, the Reformed Church of America, and they're currently in the process of breaking up because of this issue. And when those things happen to institutions, they're kind of a mess. You have pension plans in institutions, you have medical benefits, you have long-standing relationships with people that you may differ with them on an issue, but they're still your friend and they're still your colleague and you went to school with them. And so these things are very painful. And so I could just shut up about it and let it happen, but I want the church to have a better conversation about it. And I know full well I am probably not going to change the outcome, but I'm also not going to just stick my head in the sand. So I'm going to say what I'm going to say. And people are going to have to deal with it.
Okay, well, Paul, the thing is, have a better conversation. I'm like, well, if we go based on this conversation, no word answers. It's just it's hard, Andrea. There's conflict. Like that's it. Well, what does a better conversation look like if there's no definitive answer? You have to come with something to the table, right?
I think a better conversation has better understanding of each other, even if the institution's split.
How does that
Well, okay.
look?
So think about. So do you know any couples that have divorced?
Yes.
Are there better divorces and worse divorces?
Yes.
Why?
Because some people are able to be cordial and others can't deal with the hate they have for their ex.
Yeah. So if we're going to have a divorce in the Christian Reformed Church, let's have a better divorce. I'd rather we not have a divorce, but that seems unlikely. So I know people like you. I know people who've had better divorces and people who've had worse divorces. And there are patterns to having better divorces. I tend to think that these issues, like the same-sex marriage one, is something that will be resolved, but on a time frame which is far longer than our lifespans. I mean, the church didn't come to, Nicaea happens in the 4th century. And even after Nicaea happened, it's not like, okay, Trinity, divinity of Christ, it's all settled. So say we all. No, it went on for centuries. We still have Sam around, Sam, one of our really good friends who, isn't buying this whole Trinity thing. And Jacob on the Discord server, who's, he and Sam are, together on one thing that, these Trinitarians, they're all wet.
Monotheism, yeah.
That's right. So, but, and so when, it was very interesting when Sam first popped up, it was like I was in a little bit of terror because I thought, oh, crap. A lot of the stuff I talk about isn't really going to get me into trouble. But wobbly on the Trinity, that can, yeah, still in the church, that'll get you in trouble. And I have a ton of respect for Sam because he has the courage to stand by his convictions. And so what hopefully we do now, sure would I like Sam to finally say, yes, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I'd love the day that Sam does that. I don't know if I'll ever see that day, but in the meantime, I want to be friends with Sam, and I want to have productive conversations with Sam. And I want the same thing for people who think differently on same-sex marriage, because I look at what's happening and I say two hardened sides, and I say, all right, I understand your position. Is there anything else we can learn from our difference here? Because actually, when I talk to Sam, I learn a ton of things about Sam, and I have a much better understanding of a lot of stuff. And so I can learn from people I disagree with. In fact, that's almost always the case. So let's have better divorces. And when you look at couples that are having a better divorce, it's usually a couple that can actually talk about their failed marriage, maybe agree to some points. There'll be other points they won't agree on, but agree to some points within their failed marriage, and maybe even come to some kind of agreements that allow them to continue to engage productively over things that they still share. Because one of the dirty little secrets of divorce is it's never really over. And you see that with couples. I remember talking to a guy who went to this church. Of course, he had a daughter with his first wife. They split up. He married someone else. And what are you going to do at family gatherings? And his first wife didn't play fair. I mean, with his second wife there, he would come up to him, and in front of her second husband, would come up to him and kind of flirt with him. And of course, that drove the second wife crazy. And the second husband just kind of laughed it off like, yeah, that's what she does. But this is how we are. So let's love each other all the way up to and including our enemies, and let's do it even before the divorce.
Does there have to be a divorce?
I'd like there to not be a divorce in the Christian Reformed Church, but there are a group of people that, there are two groups of people that want things that are contradictory. Now, this is why, so in our church, every now and then, because we got a lot of older people here, we get a few older people here because we don't have a lot of anything here, a few older people here, and someone will be like, we had our wedding anniversary, 53 years. We celebrate that. Why? That's an achievement, especially when you get to know people and their marriages. It's not easy. Marriage is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And this is with a person that everyone decided, okay, we're going to all get together and wear nice clothes and stand up in front of friends and have someone that represents an ideal and make promises to each other. And, you don't go into marriage lightly. And then you can't get along. You can't even stand the sight of each other. You can't live together anymore. Yeah. All right. Well, but that's, the Christian Reformed Church seems to be heading towards a divorce in it. I don't want it to happen, but I can't stop it. I'm not Pope of the CRC.
Right. And that's actually something that I was thinking about. I've been, dabbling with the Orthodox Church, ortho-curious, if you will.
A lot of that on the Discord server.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Peugeot, and thanks, Lord of Spirits, guys.
The show's so dreamy.
I
Him and his
know.
icons.
Yeah. Gosh.
His graven images.
I know. Graven. Oh, you and
I saw a little bit of the Babylon Bee interview.
Yeah, I watched it. It was good. What were they like? Oh, he's like, Michelangelo, and we're like finger painting or something like that. But no, it's I'm thinking about, like, I'm kind of bashing institutions, and here I'm all like, the Orthodox Church, which is like, we never split.
That's right.
We stood firm.
Everything right from the start, and you all got it wrong. So give it up and join us, because we've never changed. That's the Orthodox Church.
I know. And that's something that I would like to delve into, how they deal with such issues like this. I don't know, because I don't really know what has happened historically on the Eastern side of things with these. I know about those Catholic laws and such, but I don't know how they, have incorporated culture into themselves. And a lot of it is regional, because it is a regional, like the Russian Orthodox or Romanian or Greek, or I know that they have a different way of doing it. But so I suppose I'm being slightly hypocritical, being like, it's institutions, and like, hey, Orthodox Church, you guys haven't changed, and that's why I like you. I like the idea of submitting to the authority of the church. Just not my Protestant church.
Yeah, that's right. I hate those Protestants because they don't love gays. I'm going Orthodox.
Wait. Where they haven't changed.
Okay. Protestants won't change, so I hate them. So I'm going to the institution that has really tried not to change at all.
I know. That's why we're all hypocrites. We're all hypocrites, Paul.
We are.
But
that's fine. And it's and part of what's interesting is, it's really exciting to see the Orthodox on the North American church scene, because they're bringing fresh ideas. Well, they say these aren't fresh; these are very old. Well, they're new to me, so.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, and hence my remembering. Oh, right, I've been interested in those guys, and they are very institutional heavy. So it is, you know what, even though I was kind of like poo-pooing your idea of like, oh, it's just conflict, there's conflict, and it'll just happen, and here's no specifics, Andrea, just conflict. But I see why that is a fruitful attitude, to just accept that is how we work things out. Verbal conflict is can be constructive. And for someone who is on the more higher agreeable side, it is good for me to be reminded that, it'll be hard, but it'll be good in the end. And that's actually how I approach my marriage with my husband. We both are, we look at arguments and difficulties like it'll be hard, but in the end it'll be good. So I suppose you can kind of like level up those things. It just gets harder and harder with the more people. Yeah. So none of my questions were necessarily answered, but it was just sort of the method of going about such things in a way like that was sort of a good reminder for me to not look at those things as failures, looking at them as opportunities. Did I sum it up?
Yeah, I thought that was good.
Okay. Thanks for this conversation, Paul. You're a regular. You're my regular on my channel, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. That's great. That's great. Well, I thank you for having me, and thank you for asking these questions, because it's good to, it's a little different from the randos conversations, because the randos conversations obviously have their own patterns too. Get into the story of the person and then find out sort of where I intersect with the story and talk about those issues and land the plane in an hour. So that's part of the reason I do these other kinds of conversations too. And it's fun to do them repeatedly with certain people, because, okay, so, you and I don't know each other well at all, really, but we know each other a little bit. We've had a little bit of conversation. So then, you can sort of build on some things, and people who have watched multiple conversations can sort of build on some things. So that's part of the reason I do what I do. And I appreciate what you do.
Oh, well, thank you, Paul. You're much appreciated in this household as well. So.
Oh, good.
And cut. And thank you for coming. Cut.
If you would subscribe, that would be the bee's knees.